The chalk snapped in her hand. Professor Elaine Ross stared at the equation on the board, the one she'd called unsolvable by anyone in this building, now finished. Correctly, by a man in a gray janitor's uniform, holding a mop in one hand and chalk in the other. "I'll marry whoever solves this," she had joked 10 minutes ago, to a room full of laughing students. Nobody was laughing now. If you believe in kindness and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Grandpa's Story Chair. Before we start, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from, and what city. I read every single one, and I'd love to know where tonight's story is finding you. Marcus Webb arrived at Hardin University every morning at 5:15 a.m., before the sun, before the students, before anyone else was awake enough to notice him. He liked it that way. He pushed his cart down corridor B, past the physics department, past the glass trophy case nobody ever looked at, and let himself into lecture hall 4. The chairs were always the same, some pushed in, some left crooked, one leg of a desk always slightly loose in the back row. He fixed it every week. Nobody ever thanked him for that. Nobody knew he did it. At 51, Marcus had learned to make himself small. He wiped whiteboards clean of equations he understood better than most of the professors who wrote them. He emptied trash cans full of crumpled homework with mistakes he could spot from across the room. He never said a word about any of it. His apartment was 11 minutes away by bus, a one-bedroom above a laundromat, the kind of place where the radiator clanked at night like it was trying to tell him something. On the wall above his bed hung a single photograph, a younger Marcus in a cap and gown, holding a diploma, grinning like the world was still soft and forgiving. That was 14 years ago, before the accident, before the medical bills swallowed everything he'd built, before the job offers stopped calling back once they saw the 4-year gap in his resume. Now, he mopped floors. He fixed loose desk legs. He listened, sometimes, through the propped open door of Lecture Hall 4, to lectures on differential equations he could have taught blindfolded. He never told anyone that. Not the students who stepped over his cart without looking at him. Not the faculty who called him the janitor like it was his only name. And especially not Professor Elaine Ross, brilliant, sharp-tongued, 38 years old, the youngest tenured professor in the department's history who had walked past him in that hallway nearly 200 times without once meeting his eyes. Today would be the 201st. It started as an ordinary Thursday. Professor Ross strode into lecture hall 4 11 minutes late, coffee in one hand, a folder of ungraded midterms in the other. Her students straightened in their seats, not out of respect, exactly, but out of the particular alertness she demanded without asking for it. "Today," she said, setting her coffee down hard enough to make the front row flinch, "we're doing something different." She turned to the whiteboard and began writing. Not a simple problem. A monster of an equation, the kind she'd been quietly working on for 3 weeks for a research paper she hadn't yet told the department she was struggling with. Non-linear, dense, layered with variables that fought each other across 4 lines. "This," she said, capping the marker, "is currently unsolved. Not unsolvable unsolved. By anyone in this room. Possibly by anyone in this building." A nervous laugh rippled through the class. "Tell you what," she said, and there was an edge of theater in her voice now, the kind professors use when they know they're being watched. "Whoever solves this by the end of the semester, I'll marry them." The class erupted. Someone whistled. A girl in the second row said, "Professor Ross, that's not fair. Half of us are already taken." More laughter. Ross smiled, satisfied. The kind of smile that came from being the smartest person in a room and knowing it. She didn't notice the door at the back propped open. She didn't notice the man leaning on his mop, still as a photograph, staring at the board with an expression none of her students had ever seen on anyone in that room before. Recognition. Marcus hadn't meant to stop. He'd been passing through to empty the recycling bin outside the hall. But something about the second line of that equation had reached into his chest and pulled. He knew that structure. He'd seen it before, not in a textbook, but in his own handwriting, 14 years ago, in a research notebook that still sat, untouched, in a box under his bed. A notebook from the life he used to have. A life where his name used to appear on published papers instead of maintenance schedules. He told himself to keep walking. His feet didn't move. For 3 days, he thought about nothing else. He watched, through that same propped door, as Professor Ross grew visibly frustrated, erasing, rewriting, erasing again. He heard her mutter once to a teaching assistant, "I don't think anyone in this building can actually solve it." I was joking, obviously, but I almost wish someone would. Almost wish. Marcus stood outside that door longer than he should have, mop forgotten in his hand, staring at 4 lines of chalk that felt, for the first time in 14 years, like they were calling his name. Friday. Final class before the weekend. Professor Ross was mid-sentence, half erasing the board in visible frustration, when the door creaked open. Every head turned. Marcus stood in the doorway. Uniform. Mop bucket rolled to one side, left behind in the hallway. He'd walked in on purpose this time. "Can I help you?" Ross asked, more clipped than she meant to be. A few students snickered. "You said," Marcus said quietly, "whoever solves it, you'd marry." The room went silent in the way. Rooms only go silent right before something unforgettable happens. Ross blinked. "That was a joke." "I know." Marcus stepped further inside. "I'm not here for the marriage part." More laughter, nervous this time. Uncertain whether to laugh at him or with him. "Then what do you want?" Ross said, arms crossing. 5 minutes, Marcus said. "That's all." She should have said no. Later, she would tell people she still didn't know why she didn't. Maybe it was the look on his face. Not embarrassment, not nervousness, but something closer to calm. The calm of a man who already knew the answer and was simply deciding whether to say it out loud. "Fine," she said. 5 minutes. Marcus set down the mop. He picked up the chalk from the tray, the same chalk she'd been gripping in frustration 2 minutes earlier, and began to write. He didn't write like a man guessing. He wrote like a man remembering. Line 1, corrected in 9 seconds. Line 2, restructured entirely. Ross opened her mouth to object, then closed it, watching. Line 3. He paused only once, tilting his head slightly, the way a man does when checking his own work against something in his memory. Line 4. He underlined twice. Solved. 4 minutes and 41 seconds. The room didn't move. Somewhere in the second row, a student's pen rolled off a desk and hit the floor, and the sound seemed enormous. Ross stared at the board, then at Marcus, then at the board again, walking closer, checking each line with the sharp, disbelieving eyes of someone whose entire identity was built on being the smartest person in any room she entered. "This is," she started, then stopped. "This is correct." "Yes," Marcus said simply. "How?" It wasn't a question. It was a demand. Marcus set the chalk down gently on the tray, the way a man returned something that was never really his to keep. "I used to be an engineer," he said. "Before. A different life." He looked at the board one more time. His handwriting, after 14 years, standing on a whiteboard in a room full of strangers. "This structure, I worked on something almost identical in 2011. Before I stopped." "Stopped?" Ross's voice had lost all of its earlier sharpness. "My daughter got sick," Marcus said. "Then she didn't get better. Then there was nothing left, not money, not time, not the version of me who published papers." He picked his mop back up, almost apologetically. "I'm not here to collect on a joke, Professor Ross. I just couldn't watch you struggle with something I already knew the answer to. That felt worse than staying quiet." He turned to leave. "Wait," Ross said. The whole room was still holding its breath. Marcus didn't marry Professor Ross. That was never the story, and both of them knew it from the very first second in that hallway. What happened instead was quieter and slower, and in its own way far more remarkable. Ross spent the next 2 weeks reading through Marcus's old research notebook, the one he'd kept in a box under his bed for 14 years. She found gaps a mentor could help him close, and doors she still had the power to open. She made a call to a colleague in engineering, not asking for a favor, but simply saying, "There's someone you need to meet." It wasn't instant. It wasn't a fairy tale. Marcus was cautious, at first, unsure whether to trust a door that had been closed to him for so long. But Ross kept showing up not with pity, but with respect, the kind she'd never once offered him in 200 hallway crossings. 6 months later, Marcus Webb walked back into Hardin University. Not with a mop, with a laptop bag, a guest research badge, and a seat in the very lecture hall he used to clean before sunrise. He still says hello to the new janitor every morning. He still remembers what it felt like to be invisible. And Professor Elaine Ross, the woman who once joked about marrying a genius, learned something she never expected to learn from a man in a gray uniform. That brilliance doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it mops your floors for 14 years, waiting quietly for someone to simply look up. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with someone who still believes kindness matters. And before you go, comment, kindness still exists. If you believe even one good act can change someone's life,